The cases of Lyme are exploding in number, and their severity impacts our economy as well as quality of life for Americans. It affects people's ability to perform their jobs, children's ability to go to school, families' ability to function normally. The disease, if undetected and untreated, can cause the most severe kinds of pain and disability.
Lyme disease is often thought of as a benign and inconsequential disease, but there is nothing benign or inconsequential about Lyme disease. It's far more complicated than the public and many in the medical community believe, and it can have an enormous impact on all of us, not just those infected by this insidious disease.
In 2013, the Center for Disease Control reported a tenfold increase in cases of Lyme disease. Cases skyrocketed from 30,000 to 300,000 new cases per year. That made it the fastest growing infectious disease in the United States and continues to dramatically increase. Despite this increase in Lyme disease cases, funding for research remains inadequate. This tenfold increase is partly due to the rising population of rodents, the carriers of Lyme disease, and the decline of their predators. Additionally, the impacts of forest fragmentation and climate change have enabled the infected ticks to spread across the country.
But an increase in the Lyme disease infection rate may not all stem from carriers, couriers, and the decline of their predators in a changing ecology. Researchers are now looking at other possible means of transmission.
Dr. Neil Spector, an oncologist and researcher at Duke University, who helped develop a new class of breast cancer drugs, and who is also a Lyme disease survivor and advocate after undergoing a heart transplant for undiagnosed Lyme disease, discusses a CDC report about the possible presence of Lyme disease in donated organs.
There was a report from the Centers for Disease Control probably 2 or 3 years ago about 3 young individuals who died suddenly, and it was found when they were organ donors, and when they were looking at their organs and hearts in particular for organ donation, saw something unusual, followed that up the pathologists, and found that they had evidence of Lyme disease, Lyme carditis, so the Borrelia spirochete had infected their heart. One of those donors actually had some organs transplanted into a recipient, and the other 2, I believe, were not transplanted because of the evidence of Lyme disease. So I would say from that there was some hesitance to take organs from somebody who was infected and transplant it into somebody else for fear that that would be a direct transmission.
Yet most people are unaware of this growing national and global health epidemic, causing suffering in millions of people and costing the U.S. healthcare system over $1 billion annually. In particular, the public is not well informed about the risk of untreated or undertreated Lyme disease, or just how easy it is for Lyme disease to go undetected, and how hard it is to treat and cure, especially if it isn't found early. There's a false public perception that only hikers and park rangers are at risk of getting infected, but infected ticks are everywhere: backyards, urban playgrounds, and parks, making everyone potentially at risk for getting infected. In the 40 years since the Lyme bacterium was discovered and named Borrelia burgdorferi, a reliable test to detect the bacterium in an infected person's blood has yet to be developed. Instead, serological tests, which measure a person's immune response to the bacterium, are used to diagnose Lyme. According to the Harvard Dean Center for Tick-Borne Illness, current 2-tier diagnostic tests failed to catch early Lyme disease consistently. In a recent CDC study, the current test failed to test positive in patients with early Lyme disease who had a confirmed rash, missing 69% of the individuals tested.
The current diagnostics for Lyme disease, the gold standard is what's termed the 2-tier test, which is really like 1970s, 1980s types of technologies, and there's real need to develop next generation tests that are much more accurate and sensitive to identifying people with Borrelia-Burgdorferi infection, as well as infection with a spectrum of other tick-borne pathogens.
Another problem with diagnostics is that people don't always know when they've been bitten by a tick, and when they do, they don't report it to their doctors.
Ticks can be very small, that's as small as a poppy seed, and because ticks emit a numbing agent in their saliva, the patient doesn't feel the bite. Finally, the signature bullseye rash, commonly associated with Lyme disease, does not appear in all patients. The rash, known as erythema migrans, can fade and reappear and can often be mistaken for a spider bite or other skin irritations.
Therefore, the tick bite, and the subsequent rash can all go unnoticed.
Lyme disease can infect the body the way termites can infect a house. Both termites and the Lyme bacterium can go unnoticed and untreated until they have caused damage. In both cases, damage can be mitigated with early detection and treatment, but one needs to know where and how to look for the invaders.
And nobody seems to think, well, could it be something like Lyme? You know, and the interesting thing is we tend to test, for instance, for HIV in these patients, even when we think they are very low risk for HIV. Or sometimes we test them for syphilis. But, you know, you're more likely to test for those or for hepatitis than you are for Lyme.
Dr. Andy Packner, who was a neurologist at Yale, wrote a paper called Lyme Disease, the New Great Imitator. And in that paper, he reported and described in beautiful clinical detail a number of different clinical manifestations of Lyme disease that masqueraded as other diseases.
When the Borrelia spirochete was first observed, it looked like its cousin, Treponema, the causative agent for syphilis. But the Lyme spirochete is a much more sophisticated version of the syphilis spirochete and can evade detection and treatment. Through the course of its infection, as the corkscrew-shaped bacterium drills through body tissues and migrates to various body sites, symptoms subside and recur, ranging from a rash and flu-like symptoms to more severe symptoms such as joint pain, nerve paralysis, immune and neurological dysfunction, and cardiac arrhythmia.
Symptoms can manifest one day, then subside the next, making accurate diagnosis very difficult. Presenting with a plethora of symptoms, Lyme-infected patients can be misdiagnosed for years while being symptomatic. They can be told they have other diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, ALS, autism, and even Alzheimer's.
Lyme disease can also cause psychiatric and autistic-like symptoms, especially in children.
There was a young boy, age 12, who developed an severe obsessive-compulsive bicycling problem such that he lost so much weight that he was admitted to the psychiatric facility at Yale with presumed anorexia. And it turned out he had previously had a diagnosis of Lyme arthritis, so they ended up doing a spinal tap, seeing abnormalities, treating him with intravenous antibiotics, and the compulsive bicycling and anorexia went away. So these are all remarkable cases that could easily be missed if you didn't know that this is a disease that can have many different manifestations.
If not treated promptly, Lyme disease progresses to an injurious state, affecting multiple organs and making symptoms difficult or almost impossible to cure.
It can even be potentially fatal.
With 300,000 cases a year, it, I think, demands more attention than Zika virus, which overnight becomes, a WHO global health crisis. So, and it's not to minimize the problems of Zika, but it's to say that there are children who are equally suffering with Lyme disease and children, who may be dying from the consequences, and adults who are dying from the consequences of Lyme disease.
Drawing from her near-death experience from Lyme disease, Stanford Lyme founders Sherry Kagan and her husband Laird have joined forces with Stanford scientists to pave a medical path to wellness for patients at all stages of Lyme disease. Sherry Kagan, despite having access to the best healthcare professionals in the world, had undiagnosed Lyme disease for years.
And even after receiving a Lyme diagnosis and treatment, Sherry continues to struggle with lingering symptoms, though her condition has improved. She and her husband Laird were shocked by the lack of medical help and options available to Lyme patients, and discovered that despite the high occurrence of Lyme disease, research on this extremely complex disease is still in its infancy. Undeterred, Sherry, while still undergoing IV treatment, and her husband Laird met with various department heads at Stanford University seeking answers. One particular auspicious meeting between the Kagans and the former medical school dean, Dr. Phil Pizzo, set the stage for Stanford and the Kagans to make Lyme history. Dr. Pizzo appointed the Stanford Lyme Working Group, a collaborative effort among Stanford researchers and researchers from several other major universities, including Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and Columbia University. Much like Polly Murray, the Lyme, Connecticut mother who challenged the medical community to discover Lyme, the Kagans are now challenging the medical community to find solutions to end the pain and suffering of Lyme disease patients.
Lyme disease is a devastating condition that's very poorly understood, affects many, many people throughout the world, and it's been neglected scientifically. With the Lyme Disease Working Group here at Stanford University and the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, we're hoping to change that.
Today, several years after Dr. Pizzo appointed the Stanford Lyme Working Group, there are major efforts underway for the more accurate, reliable testing and the more effective treatment of Lyme disease.
But I do believe that a certain subgroup of patients who had Lyme disease are left with some degree of residual ongoing inflammatory problem, and that whether this is the sign or the expression of an ongoing active borreliosis versus just an independent immune process due to one of the two mechanisms I mentioned cannot be yet determined without further study. And I think we're going to find down the road that the treatment is a little bit different for those. You have a separate immune process versus some remnant of the Borrelia left in you versus a reactivation of the borreliosis. I think those are going to be three different conditions which require three different pathways of treatment.
Lyme disease shares molecular mechanisms with many different human diseases, both microbial infections as well as certain inflammatory diseases. And the work of the Stanford Lyme Working Group can help uncover these underlying mechanisms, and not only in advancing our understanding of Lyme disease itself, but certain therapeutics that are developed for other diseases may be identified that could be repurposed for the effective treatment of Lyme disease patients in the near term.
One such repurposing is CD47 antibody therapy, developed by the preeminent stem cell researcher Dr. Irv Weissman. Dr. Weissman identified a protein known as CD47, which is overproduced in all cancer cells. By expressing CD47, these cells are resistant to being eaten by macrophage. 2 years ago, Dr. Weissman approached Sherry and told her that his research might be applicable for Lyme disease. Sherry went on to facilitate the collaboration between Irv Weissman's group and Dr. Rajada's BioAd lab to work together to develop antibody therapies for PTLD.
We've developed an antibody which is now in clinical trials for cancer that blocks the don't eat me signal. And so our part of looking at this disease is that the disease has beaten the immune system so far. And how is it beating the immune system? Well, if it is doing it in part by preventing the macrophages, the big eating cells, from eating either the bacterium by itself or those spirochetes that live inside cells. If it gets inside a cell and hides from the immune system, then no matter how many T cells and B cells you have making an immune response, it's the infected cell in hiding that would keep reintroducing the Lyme disease agent to the body. So we are looking at cancer, that's our primary objective, and we're taking a new look at persistently infected cells, whether they're infected with Lyme disease or HIV or malaria or tuberculosis. We're looking at that whole set of things to see if we had missed this perfectly simple principle that if you block the don't eat me signals, what happens? Will they get eaten and killed?
Dr. Nevzhu Beshevic, director of the Harvard Dean Center for Tick-Borne Illness, addresses the power of collaborating with top scientists to tackle some of the biggest questions about Lyme disease.
The Stanford Lyme effort at Stanford University, I think, is an incredible opportunity for the Stanford researchers to engage closer, help solve some of the big problems that we have Lyme disease, including, testing the blood banks for Lyme and co-infections, also clearing up the difficulty that we currently have with in utero transmission of Lyme and early diagnosis, proper diagnosis of Lyme disease, and better understanding of why people remain chronically ill. I think that Stanford has the capacity, has the enormous power of intelligence and fantastic faculty who could tackle this problem and find solutions sooner. And together, collaborating with them, I think that we all could be stronger.
Strength through collaboration among the best and the brightest is the cornerstone of the Stanford Lyme Working Group.
I've been working in the Lyme field since the early 90s, and one of the things I've learned, especially in the last 10 years, is that the only way to make science move really fast is if you have excellent collaborations.
The Lyme Disease Research Center at Johns Hopkins University has been fortunate to collaborate with Dr. Bill Robinson at Stanford University. This has been an ideal collaboration that has really advanced our ability to do research into Lyme disease. The combination of Dr. Robinson's laboratory and our clinical research center here at Hopkins has really provided an optimal combination to develop biomarkers or tools to better measure Lyme disease and understanding the disease mechanisms that drive illness in Lyme disease.
We collaborate with Dr. Brian Fallon at Columbia University on neurologic manifestations of Lyme disease. And we are studying both samples from patients that he's characterized and identified as having post-Lyme neurologic disorders, and trying to understand the basis for those neurologic disorders.
This complex, multi-system illness needs to bring diverse stakeholders together: patients, clinicians, researchers, philanthropists, with the shared purpose to advance understanding and innovation in Lyme disease research. Stanford Lyme's unique partnership with the Stanford Lyme Working Group creates such a platform to expedite Lyme disease research. The Stanford Lyme Foundation is able to leverage Stanford's proven track record of translating scientific discovery into solutions for patients with complex diseases.
The Stanford Lyme Working Group is a set of interdisciplinary collaborators across many different departments at Stanford, including the Department of Neurology, Psychiatry, Medicine, Infectious Diseases, and together we're leveraging ideas, resources, technologies, sample sets in different laboratories and programs to further and rapidly accelerate the development of tests and therapeutics for Lyme disease.
Stanford Lyme's unique strategic partnership with top-notch scientists from Stanford will ensure that the best minds and cutting-edge research tools apply to finding a more effective cure and a better diagnostics for this complex and elusive disease, so they solve the most pressing needs of the patients. I like the collaborative approach to include researchers from other institutions so they can all work together for the common goal of making Lyme disease history.
We are so honored to have the support of Stanford Lyme. Its founders, Sherry and Laird Kagan, have been steady supporters of Stanford University and have been instrumental in helping advance national research for Lyme disease. In their personal quest for a curative treatment, and as a catalyst for collaboration with the Stanford Lyme Working Group, they inspire us to accelerate medical advancements to make Lyme disease history.
This collaboration has to extend beyond the scientists and into our communities. With Stanford Lyme, we have the opportunity to stand in the front line with top researchers unraveling the complexities of Lyme disease and its co-infections. With your help, eliminating the bane of Lyme disease is within our reach.